It's under here. It's under here. So in order for us to see, we should sort of.
Yeah.
So let's sit.
As people are making their way in, I'll ask that in the meantime people turn their cell phones off or put them on silence. There really is a wonderful rhythm to the Jewish calendar where we prepare ourselves spiritually. As I had a colleague who said he couldn't even start thinking about his high holiday sermons until he started hearing the sound of the shofar 30 days in advance. So hearing that shofar is kind of the first step. Slichot this evening is the second step. And for many years, we've tried to have a speaker who will kind of set a tone or address the issue of spiritual challenges that we live with today. Since COVID, and I think for the Jewish community since October 7th, there has really been a profound sense and feeling of loneliness. And I think that this issue of feeling isolated or feeling alone is something that really crosses denominational lines. Any human being can certainly have that feeling of isolation or of being alone. We are delighted to have with us Reverend Dr. Stephen Simmons, and he'll be speaking on putting our worst foot forward, building authentic community in a secular time. Steve is a retired professor of theology, ethics, and community ministry at Moravian Theological Seminary in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He holds a Master's of Divinity degree from San Francisco Theological Seminary and a doctorate from the University of Chicago. He's also the author of this book, Hear Us Out, 6 Questions on Belonging and Belief. And there are copies that are available afterwards if you're interested. So I'd like to have us all welcome Dr. Steve Simmons.
Good evening. Are we live? Yeah, we're live. All right. I am delighted to be with you all, and I particularly appreciate when Moshe said that I was professor of community mystery. I hope so, you know. And we're going to talk about mystery a lot tonight. I bring you greetings from First Presbyterian Church in Bethlehem. I bring you greetings from the Bethlehem Interfaith Group. It is of which Michael Singer, I have to give you credit, who went literally knocking on doors in Bethlehem and helped get us all going. And we have more than 30 faith communities represented right now and are just having a wonderful time getting to know each other. So let's begin. I'm going to make some comments on the book, and then I hope we can open up and have a good conversation together. As I put this on the screen, Rabbi Ram said, you know what that looks like, don't you? And I said, there aren't quite enough of them to be Sefirot, but it does. That never occurred to us, actually, but I kind of like it. Let me tell you, first of all, about the process. This was an 8-author book. It was published by Fortress Press last year, and when we said that 8 authors were contributing to this book, they immediately sent us some things on how do you get 8 authors to write a book together. And it was a wonderful process. We all read each other's stuff. It actually was a 5-year process, and we got to know each other well, and we hope the product was worth pursuing. We think it was. What we did in order to write the book, we talked about emerging generations. We talked about Gen X, Gen Y, millennials. We now have a Generation Alpha that's showing up, kids who turned 13 this year, and they're emerging too. And we were aware, we read 75 books together as we started this process because we wanted to get a lay of the land kind of view of this, looking at the broad landscape. But we were aware that these generations are sick to death of being surveyed and analyzed and categorized, and really, we decided to shut up and listen to them, and hence the title of the book, Hear Us Out, 6 Questions on Belonging and Belief. This was not so much a scientific sample. It was a group of 225 people from around the Lehigh Valley, or people who had spent a significant part of their lives in the Lehigh Valley. It was basically white, basically some college education. It was people who knew people who knew people, which is how you get a rolling sample. Partly because you can't just go down the street and say, we would like to have the local affiliate of the Nuns and Duns group that we could talk to, because by definition, these are folks who don't easily affiliate with institutions of any kind. We'll talk about that in a minute. The phrase nuns and duns, N-O-N-E-S and D-O-N-E-S, is something that you may have heard. It's becoming a little shop-worn. It's been around, and it has become a label, and not always a very helpful one. But as a shorthand, it describes people either who have never had a religious affiliation or had one at one time. They were involved in a church, a synagogue, a mosque, but over time they have either drifted away or sometimes run away because they've had bad experiences, or it just, as they would often tell us, it just doesn't work for them anymore, okay? So we talked to about 225 of these people between the ages of 18 and 40, and it was during COVID time. And so we had hoped to get them together for face-to-face interviews in the same room, but that was simply impossible. And so we did all of our interviews via Zoom, and all shared Zoom fatigue together. But we don't think that impaired the quality of the research. And it was interesting that when we talked to people, well, first of all, let me Let me tell you, we looked at 6 generally categories of questions we want to talk about with people. You can see them here, and if you have difficulty seeing the screen, it was beliefs, legacy, inspiration, belonging, values, and adversity. And we asked 5 questions of these folks originally, and here were the 5 questions we started out with, and then I'll tell you about the 6th. Tell me a story that has shaped who you are today. Tell me about a place or community where you feel you belong. Tell me about your favorite story, novel, game, film, or song, and that was an expandable category. Your favorite piece of media, whatever that might be. Tell me about a missed opportunity or challenge that has helped to shape who you are today. How would you like to be remembered? Okay, those were the 5 original questions, and we wanted to make them life questions and not immediately religion questions, because we didn't want, as we would say, we didn't want to make this too churchy. Okay? We wanted to talk to people where they were and really listen to them on a kind of level, neutral playing field. And about 3 interviews in, they began to ask us, how come you're not asking us how our beliefs have changed? And we explained, and they said, no, you gotta ask us that question. So we did, and it was one of the things we talked to them about. And as we talked to them, often they were a little suspicious, you know, because it was, even though it was people who knew people who knew people, we would be interviewing someone that we might not know well or hardly know at all. And I think some of them were just kind of waiting to see when the religious piece was going to sneak in. You know, it was like they were waiting for the big butterfly net, you know. And once they realized there was no butterfly net that we were going to drop over them, it was amazing how they opened up. And we would go in thinking that maybe this interview will go for 20 minutes, you know, and then we'll jot things down. We recorded them and let them know that we were recording them, but obviously anonymized all the responses and all of that. We followed good procedure. But it was interesting. We'd get into the conversation, and about 45 minutes later, we'd have to call time because they really, really, really got into it. And what they told us was, they said, thanks for asking. We never talk about these things with anyone else. And for us, these were, to put it this way, it was kind of a low-ball life question. You know, it was kind of stuff that, to us, this was our kind of daily bread and butter. And it was fascinating, the number of people who said, we never talk about these things. And they really, really wanted to, but they just hadn't had the opportunity to do that. And as we talked, it became clear that they were hungry to share deep things of life. And they did. All right. Here are some of the key findings that, some of our key learnings that I'd like to share with you. First of all, and again, these are broad generalizations. You're going to find a lot of variations within this because they are coming from different places. But generally speaking, here's what we learned. They had little trust or faith in institutions generally, and religious institutions in particular, and they had very little faith in the political process. They didn't think, as they would say, our votes won't make a difference. They thought that institutions tended to be exclusive, out of touch with their current reality, rigid and judgmental, and really pretty unresponsive. And I think editorial comment, it's going to be really interesting to see how that may change during this election season in about a month. We'll see. We're beginning to talk about the participation of emerging generations in the upcoming election, and we'll see how the numbers track on that. On the other hand, they were open to organizations that demonstrate integrity, openness to diversity, creativity, and compassion, and they would join these kinds of organizations. They would be sports teams, they'd be drama and other arts groups, they would be yoga groups. They were eager to find a place where they belonged. But as we talked to them, the kind of belonging that they wanted was what we came to call flexible belonging. Okay? They wanted to affiliate with something, but they wanted to be able to disaffiliate. They wanted to be able to come and go and not get trapped, not be asked to make a lifetime commitment, you know, any of that kind of thing. But they really, really did want to belong. So there was this kind of tension involved there. We want to be part of something. We don't want to be incorporated into something. Okay? And I think that's one of the kind of abiding tensions that these folks are dealing with. They tended to be egalitarian and inclusive and collaborative. And as I understand it, especially for Generation Alpha, the generation coming up, they tend to have friends who represent great diversity. within their own particular group of friends. Now, this was true pretty much of all the people we talked to, but it really seems to be an increasing trend that you want to have friends, or you just wind up having friends who are not like you, and you value that a great deal. One of the things that we hear about these generations a lot is that they're slackers. You know, they just don't care, they don't commit to anything and all that kind of stuff. What we found from them is they weren't really apathetic, but they were uninspired. They could be passionate about social causes of various kinds, but they hadn't found anybody to really inspire them to become engaged in an ongoing, serious way. Their activism tended to be what has come to be called clicktivism, right? I find a website, I click on it, I give $10 to it, and I've saved the world, you know. And the question becomes, well, no, you know, you really haven't, but how can you deepen a level of engagement that's really going to kind of capture people's attention and best instincts and best energies? And I think that's something that we as religious institutions need to take very seriously. They believe that life is uncertain. Their motto tends to be carpe diem. The only thing you can count on, really, is your immediate circle of family and friends. There is no path laid out for you in advance. As the saying goes, you make the path by walking. And there is no ultimate future, either for you or for everybody and everything else. This is one of the things that I think, especially in Jewish and Christian thought, there is a sense that history is moving towards some kind of culmination. We're going somewhere. And for a lot of the people we talked to, it simply wasn't, you know, it's like one of those old 45 RPM records that just sort of fades out at the end. It's not, there's no final anything. The best you can hope for, really, is to have good companions on the journey with you. And that's why affiliating with a group of people of like mind and heart is very important to them. Okay. One of the intriguing aspects of this is that we found that people were glad for their relationships with older adults who had walked their own path for a while, and they really appreciated having mentors who could help them chart their way in an atmosphere of mutuality and trust. They didn't want to sit at anyone's feet, but they did want to have relationships with mature adults, with older adults who had kind of been there and sort of lived there and could share with them. But they also wanted to teach the older adults in a reciprocal kind of way. That's the kind of friendship and mentorship that they were looking for. One of the things that came up again and again and again and again was the importance of stories. Their own stories. You know, it's very interesting how you'll talk to somebody who'll say, well, you know, I really don't have a story to tell. And then 40 minutes later, they've told you this marvelous, you know, kind of story that to them is just the way they live. You know, but to you, it's everyone has an amazing story to tell. One of the things about stories that they particularly value is that stories are open-ended, they're non-prescriptive, they're subject to interpretation. And while they reported a wide range of favorites, there were lots of niche markets here. You know, people who had some indie band that they were listening to and 5 other people in the world had heard of them, but they were really, really into it. But I'd like to stop for a moment and say, now we're talking about people largely between the ages of 18 and 40. When we ask them the question, what's your favorite book, film, video game, song, whatever, what are some of the ones that you might think would rise to the top of the list? Beatles, of course. Harry Potter. These folks, and it was very interesting how Harry Potter tracked with this group because they had grown up in parallel. They'd grown up along with Harry and Hermione and Ron. You know, and so as they went through their own kind of generational shifts, they watched the characters in Harry Potter go through generational shifts. So Harry Potter was one of the big ones. Anybody else? Taylor Swift kind of crested just about the time we were finishing the book, but I think there's no question that, yeah, she would have been now. Pardon me? Lady Gaga. Anything marvelous, Rabbi Nathan says. Oh yeah, I'm saying marvelous in a scare quotes kind of way. Yeah, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was big, was really, really, really big, And which character within the Marvel Cinematic Universe would you guess was the one who really struck a chord with them? Spider-Man. Spider-Man. Yeah, partly because here he's just a high school kid. I mean, come on. He just wants to be normal. And what he wants to do is go to the prom, and the world is about to end, and so dang it, he's got to do it all over again, you know, and he's got all these spidey senses and all that stuff. And for them, it really was a question. In a world that often seems to be coming apart, you know, that often seems to be under threat in various ways, what am I called to be, and how can I live a normal life in the middle of a very strange world? So yeah, it was the ones that rose to the top of the list were the Harry Potter books and movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Lord of the Rings. It was very interesting to me, and I don't know why this was, but Hunger Games was not really big. Star Wars was not really big. In the war between Marvel and DC Comics, that would be fun to talk about, but I'm not sure we have time to do it. Maybe we could get into some of that later. You know, why Spider-Man and why not Batman? Anyway, enough of that. One of the things we found about these folks is they wanted to make their own stories. They wanted to be content creators as well. They're not a passive audience. And so their world is full of mashups and mix-ups and, you know, samplings and all kinds of things, because they feel like they are agents in their own world and they want to create their own content. And now increasingly with the various websites that you have and various kinds of platforms for artists and musicians and so on, they can do that. And so you get this very rich world of stories, a lot of them of their own making. Okay? What's one of the things that characterizes, now think again about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of magic. And a lot of, it's not just technological, but there's more going on here than meets the eye. And there's this kind of magical dimension to all of this, which I think is very interesting. They often talk more broadly about having a sense of awe and wonder and mystery. And for those of us who are people of faith, for whom that, not to cheapen it, but that's kind of our stock in trade. You wonder how we connect with folks who are in this questioning kind of awesome, awe-inspiring mode. Mental health was very big to them, and they were very open and candid. You know, for a lot of my generation, for sure, if you had a mental health problem, maybe you found a counselor, but you sure didn't talk about it a whole lot, and you didn't talk about it with people you didn't know very well. The folks we talked to were very upfront about their own mental health challenges and struggles. And I'd like to read something. This is the book. It's very orange. In fact, I was going to make the background for the slides orange, and I thought that would get really annoying after about one. But I want to read you something. This is from a woman named Jane McGonigal. Just to give you a sense of how big a deal mental health issues are for these emerging generations. And this is not only in this country, this is worldwide. McGonigal says, an under 30 group of over 10,000 rising entrepreneurs, scientists, activists, and community leaders from 165 countries was polled by the World Economic Forum for their top future forces. Interestingly, this group named mental health deterioration just above climate change and economic inequality as their #1 future force that will have the biggest global impact over the next decade. While surprising, mental health deterioration has never appeared in a global risk report before. It also makes sense. The years 2020 and 2021 marked the largest global increases in depression, anxiety, grief, burnout, loneliness, and trauma ever observed due to the pandemic and its long-term after effects. One encouraging thing about all this was as they discussed their challenges and the things that they had overcome, they were very clear that for them, these were opportunities for growth and not causes of regret. And they really saw this as a way of becoming stronger and more integrated as human beings. They were looking for a place where they could be less than perfect, where they could be honest with themselves and others, and where they could have that place to share their stories. in a receptive and non-judgmental environment without having to be right. I want to think with you for a moment about the kind of world that they, and I think we, to some extent, are experiencing right now, being told all the time about living your best life now, putting on a brave face, being at the top of your game all the time, having to sell yourself in a highly critical and competitive world, a world in which you feel that institutions have failed you and are at best indifferent toward you, being ghosted by people you counted as friends and now have turned you away, sometimes for no apparent reason. When asked to name a place where you feel you belong, 10% of our respondents said nowhere. Around half said that they felt there was no one who really knew or understood them. And again, they expressed a desire for a place where they could be honest about themselves and their experiences, a space that was both a brave space and a safe space, a place where they could put their worst foot forward, hence the title of this talk. And with High Holy Days, also known as the Days of Awe, beginning next week, what are some of the lessons for faith communities generally and for Jewish communities in particular? Now, I want to offer some thoughts, perhaps presumptuously, as a Christian friend and fellow traveler. So only you can tell me if I get it right, and this could be a cause for some interesting conversation. I'd like to begin with the words of Rabbi Yitzchak Alter of Ger, who said, "The human heart is a tablet on which God writes. Each of us has the word life engraved in our hearts by God's own hands. Over the course of a year, that engraving comes to be covered with grit. Our sins, our neglect of prayer and study, the very pace at which we live, all conspire to blot out the word life that still lies written deep within our hearts. On Rosh Hashanah, we come before God, having cleansed ourselves as best we can, to ask God to write the word life again in our hearts." As I understand it, this season is a time to explore one's life, not to attain some false place of perfection, but to reach a place of authenticity and honesty with oneself and others, trusting in God to inscribe one's name in the book of life. People are looking for that kind of place. And I think Judaism has some real assets to bring to the conversation with emerging generations. And so, with a certain amount of fear and trembling on my part, here we go. Stories. Elie Wiesel famously said that God created human beings because God likes stories. On the one hand, one of the things about Judaism is its engagement in the meticulous examination and exegesis of scriptural texts. On the other, lots of room for free play of imagination, letting the story take you where it leads you. Great traditions of Midrash that explore the white space between the letters, Hasidic stories, maybe the Sefirot thing wasn't too far off. Stories canonical and otherwise. And one of the things that I think we need to come to grips with emerging generations is that for a lot of these folks, there's no such thing as a canonical story or a non-canonical story. They're just stories that resonate with your experience and tell you something about life. Traditionally, we have often asked ourselves, how can my life conform to the text? And I think they are often asking, how can I use the text to interpret my experience? Those sound kind of similar, but I think they're actually quite different. I want to make a distinction that we make in the book, and actually it comes to us from a gentleman named Doug Adams, not the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Doug Adams, but Douglas Adams, who is a professor of theology and the arts at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. And he drew a distinction between parent stories and godparent stories, and he told one from his own life that I'd like to share with you. Doug, when he was about 10 years old, was in Little League, and a task that was given to him by the coach was that he was to time the other kids as they ran around the bases and try to get them to improve their time and step up the pace and so on a little bit. And so he did that, and one day he got so involved in doing what he was doing that he absentmindedly stuck the watch in his pocket, and it wound up on his dresser, where his father discovered it and said, Doug, what's this? And he said, well, gee, Dad, I'm sorry, I forgot. it's the coach's watch, and I kind of forgot, and I stuck it in my pocket. And his father began to read him out about how he was, he's going to wind up in Sing Sing, and he's on a road of degradation, and, this little act of larceny was a really big deal. His grandfather walked into the room and looked at him and he said, "Dougie, you're looking a little down in the mouth." He said, what's the matter? And Doug said, "Well, there's a watch thing." And his grandfather said, "Oh, yeah. That reminds me of the night your dad got drunk when he was in high school and he swiped the car and drove it into the lake," at which point his father abruptly changed the subject. Professor Adams's point is that, as he puts it, parent stories are to make you good. Grandparent stories understand, okay? They understand that life is messy. They understand that life is three-dimensional. They understand that you're probably not going to wind up in Sing Sing for some minor infraction. And it's really important that we, as tellers of stories, I think, become adept at grandparent stories. Anybody who's read through the book of Genesis knows that there are lots of messy people and lots of messy families. And life is messy. And often the Bible is messy. And to allow it to be that and to create settings in which people can ask the real honest questions about the biblical text and not have some, so often we talk to people who say, "Yeah, I know the punchline to this story," right? You're just kind of leading me to this inevitable conclusion. If we can open things up and also include some of those non-canonical stories with people. They could be Hasidic tales, they could be Spider-Man, they could be Zen koans, they could be all kinds of different things. And open these conversations up and have them honestly with people so that they can rediscover the texts that we hold to be so important and maybe give us new insights on what's going with them. I think it's all to the good for everybody. Another asset that I think Judaism brings is what I would call a sense of playful reverence. Leave lots of room for free expression. One of the things I envy you, speaking as a Christian, is a kind of holy zaniness that shows up, especially not only in the celebration of Purim, but in other holidays as well. I envy you, your noisemakers. And I think to create those kinds of playful spaces where people can create little plays, there are some people who are doing what's called bibliodrama right now, and they'll do a passage of Scripture and then say, how are we going to play it this time? And new insights will come up. People will play different characters in different ways, and it's a wonderfully generative kind of experience. Another thing that I think we share, at least I hope we share in our better moments we do, is a passion for social justice. You'll see some kid walking down the street wearing a T-shirt with Micah 6:8 on it, and he may not know a whole lot about the Bible, but he does know to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God. Okay. Effective concern for the marginalized, the poor, the refugee, the immigrant, for the people who need help, and finding effective ways to make that happen. Another one that I think is incredibly important is not knowing more than we know, but trusting, hoping, repenting, forgiving, and being forgiven in the confidence that God knows. Okay. Again, on Rosh Hashanah, we come before God, having cleansed ourselves as best we can, to ask God to write the word life again in our hearts. Now, I think it seems paradoxical to say that one of the strengths of Judaism and of faith in general comes from not knowing, but our conversation partners were looking for a place, to borrow an expression from the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, a place that is exploratory rather than explanatory. Okay? Put that on your fridge. Or as my black friends would say, that'll preach. I admire Judaism's historic reticence to name the holy and to allow for both spirited discussion and reverent silence. Okay? By the time I was ending my career at Moravian Seminary, a lot of my students were writing G-D. We're talking about Adonai. We're talking about Hashem. These were Christians. Because of that sense of a reticence before the divine, not knowing more than you know. I was in a discussion group with some nuns and duns last week, and one of the members, who is herself a psychotherapist, said that what she was looking for in such a setting was a holding space for not knowing. I just kind of drop that one on you and let you sit with that one for a while, but it's to create a holding space for not knowing. You know, we're people who are supposed to have the answers. And this is a place to, frankly say, I don't have the answer. Let's talk about this together. In a strange way, I think it's a gift that we as faith communities can bring to the conversation in a way that a purely secular culture can't. And I'm going to plant a stake in the ground here. In the September 1st issue of the New York Times Magazine, Matthew Sher, some of you may have seen this, he wrote an article on the loneliness epidemic that is affecting people worldwide, in which he says the following: "It is impossible to look at the aggregate data from the 1950s onward, including a new survey by Gallup on weekly attendance at religious services, which sank last year to 21% of the U.S. population, and not feel that something has been lost." He goes on to quote Harvard School of Education child and family psychologist Richard Weisbord, quote, "I'm not suggesting that we should become more religious, but I want to suggest to you that religious communities are a place where adults engage kids, stand for moral values, engage kids in big moral questions, where there's fusion of a moral life and a spiritual life, a sense that you have obligations to your ancestors and your descendants, where there is a structure for dealing with grief and loss. I feel urgently like we have to figure out how to reproduce those aspects of religion in secular life." Well, I'm suggesting that we do become more religious, not in a narrow or sectarian way, but in a thoughtful and caring one that acknowledges that we do, in fact, live and die in the presence of the holy, and that, in fact, the Lord does require certain things of us. I think it's a very live question whether the aspects of religion that Weisbord describes can be reproduced in secular life. We identified a kind of holy nostalgia among many of our interviewees. They liked where they had come from. They missed some aspects of where they had come from, and they realized that it had imbued them with a lot of the values that they carried forward, even when they were no longer practitioners of a particular faith tradition. They're also looking for a sense of the transcendent, the holy, a sense of reverence and wonder and awe and those things I talked about before, a holding space for not knowing. In our research, we found that emerging generations are seeking a lively and inviting place where they can ask hard questions, where the answers are always being brought to birth among us, where the asking itself is honored and even considered holy, a community of mutual support and mentorship. So even though it may be just a little early for me to wish you Shana Tova, I do hope that the coming days may be a time of solemnity and joy as you embark on a new year. Thank you. All righty, I'm going to come down where you are. Oh, Michael? Yes. But I want to be able to look you right in the eye here, so anyway. Yes?
Do you think where your subjects of the study have had such a heartfelt magic that this is something that religion has won while it's preparing towards providing them the alienation that you see as
Yeah, the question is that a lot of the people we talked to had a sense of the magical. You know, they wanted Harry Potter's wand, you know, or less frivolously had a real sense again that there's more going on here than we can imagine, you know, and how religious communities might take advantage of that. Now there's an endless conversation about the relationship between magic and ritual and all of that, you know, and it can go in very bizarre directions. Like, you know, if I use this magic powder that God will grant me 3 wishes or something, you know, but I think where I would go with that is to say, I think they have a sense of ritual and liturgy even that's missing in their life right now. And so they find a way to ritualize various kinds of communal experiences that they're having. For getting together and running a half marathon, for example, and then having a meal together, you know, later. But somehow I don't think it quite gets you there. Now, that's just my opinion, but I think there is that. Again, there's that transcendent dimension. There's that sense that there is more, what William James just called the more, that I think a lot of people are looking for, but they don't. But they find that the old rituals, as again, to put it in their words, they just don't work for me anymore. You know, and so how do we appropriate the best of our traditions and help to create that sense of awesomeness? Does that get at your question at all?
I'm thinking something Joseph Campbell said that when we look at myths, and people forgive me for talking about myths in our religions, as far as science and history goes, they collapse, from Joseph Campbell said that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something that people, if they give up and say, okay, look, this is not perfect, it's not about being a historian or a scientist, it's about being a better person. And I think this is a solution for people that they can grab onto good things, let go of maybe left brain thinking.
Yeah, let me tell you one of my favorite examples personally is the story of. Yeah, how do we? Oh, there are people in cyberspace who are listening. Okay, all right. Yeah, the question, Joseph Campbell talking about myth, you know, and anybody who's read The Hero of the Thousand Faces or so on knows what Campbell's talking about. And again, the idea of myth not as a false story, but as a story that goes places to make sense of our experience in our life in a way that a chemist, you know, the periodic table won't get you there, for example. And I think one of my favorite examples of this would be if you're talking about the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You know, and people will say, do you actually believe that there was a historic Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in 4004 BCE? And so, you know, and I will say, I don't believe it's a story that happened, but it happens every day, right? You know, and I think if you can couch it in those kinds of terms, bear in mind what we said about the kind of media that these folks often go for. They go for Lord of the Rings, they go for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they go for Harry Potter. They go often for things where it's a journey. You're trying to go someplace with a group of boon companions, you know, and there's that sense of awe and mystery and wonder about sometimes the journey itself is enough, you know. So anyway, yeah, Moshe.
This isn't a question, just a comment.
Yeah.
An observation. So there are books that came out since October 7th, and by Israelis. And these are within that age group. So one is by 37-year-old Yair Admon. And the book is called One Day in October, 40 Heroes, 40 Stories. What I find interesting about this, in light of your research, is, you know, and there was a lot of comparison of October 7th with the Holocaust. Post-Holocaust literature was theological. This whole death of God kind of literature that emerged. But here it's stories that are emerging, as opposed to, you know, how do we understand evil? But you know, so there isn't what emerges from this isn't from that generation. Isn't an attempt to grapple with the difficult question of how can people do this, but the question of look at the humanity in some of these stories.
You know, it's what occurs to me is you think of the debate between Elie Wiesel and Richard Rubinstein, and Rubinstein eventually kind of gave up certainly his theism, you know, and all that, and Rubinstein kind of comes from that generation that's trying to explain the inexplicable, and Wiesel is just a master storyteller, and it's very intriguing that this is kind of replicating itself in what you're talking about. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, I didn't see it much personally. Oh, I'm sorry. the question has come up, there's a lot of controversy about what's happening in higher ed these days. And the classical version of higher education, at least as I, was taught it, is teaching students how to think so that you can, in a sense, go on and become self-educated as you go on, rather than teaching students what to think. And the idea that you have, multiple ideologies and schools of thought and all of that that are constantly being talked about and dissected and analyzed and all of that. One of the things that I think has happened, and this Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt have come up with a book called, I think it's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And one of the things that they worry about is that students, back in the day when I was in school, a professor would say something you would disagree with. Now, this was back in the late 1960s, and I'm not sure this was necessarily the best way to approach it, but students would have no trouble at all getting in the professor's face in a sense of, just really grappling with that. I disagree with that, so on and so on. And Lukianoff and Haidt, one of the things they say is what's more likely to happen now is that a student may say, and again, this is a very broad generalization, but the professor will say something and the student will say, I'm personally offended by that. That hurt me. And so you get into this kind of self-censorship mode that really militates against, the kind of education that we think of as being higher education. We didn't see that. Again, our age group was a little older for the most part, and they were ready to take it all on, and all. But I think it's a legitimate concern. So thank you. Yeah. Yes. In part, yeah, it partly can be. What concerns, the question is, talking about, again, the thing that came to us is that the people we were talking to weren't as much, they weren't slackers, they weren't unpassionate, if you will, but they were uninspired. They hadn't found something to command their best efforts and intelligence. And the question was, there are a lot of radical movements out there that are happy to hoist a banner and really kind of take people in maybe some rather extreme directions. And I think that's a legitimate concern. One of the things that I think would be helpful in that is if folks like us could talk about the things we're passionate about and the things we're engaged in or would like to be engaged in. I always told my students, whatever cause you're interested in, whether it's protecting the environment, whether it's fighting racism, poverty, whatever it might be, you're about 3 mouse clicks away from finding an organization that's doing good, serious work in that. And if I think, it's sort of, you click on the thing that makes the loudest noise very often, and I think if they can talk to people they trust who are seriously engaged in various kinds of work to make the world a better place, I think they do get inspired. So maybe it's up to us to help do some mentoring and give some guidance. Thank you. I would like to ask I want to ask a question of you, which is, I'm a Presbyterian, you are Jewish, and I tried to lay out some things that I think would be assets and possibilities within your own tradition and also within our tradition, but things that I think are particular strengths that we have to bring to this conversation. And I just sort of generally like to ask if you would make a comment from where you sit in the midst of your own tradition about that. I'm not sure. But let me put it this way. I am very interested in broadening out the conversation to include other faith groups. I'm currently talking with a group of Turkish Muslims over in Bethlehem and all of this. And again, this tended to be sort of Christian-centric in some ways. And as we look at broadening this out, because we're all dealing with these issues, This is not anything that's specific to a particular faith community. What do you take from what I said that may be helpful, or if it was way off base? Yeah, Michael?
Well, I was just gonna add to the first, what I thought you were asking first, what other things from our vantage point we had. I want to build on what you said
Okay.
about a space of not knowing, in the sense that we believe often that Torah is a creative process. It's not a thing. It is something we all engage in Chavruta. And a Chavruta, a partnership can be someone older, someone younger, together, learning together, and then adding their voice to the story. In essence, since Torah is dynamic and creative, and we have lots of great midrash that plays into this, like, God is talking about, oh, Rabbi Akiva is so great, Moses, I want to meet this Akiva. He goes down, God gives permission to go to Akiva's study while he's teaching the students, and Moses sits in the back, and Akiva's teaching about the crowns on top of the letters of the Torah, and they mean different things, and like each one is, and Moses like, that's not what I meant. That's not what I said. And Moses was getting very, very upset. And he goes back and he's going, God, I don't understand this, Akiva, I don't understand this. And then at the very end of the lesson, Akiva says, and this was taught to us by Moses, who passed it to the, to the prophets and the prophets and the sages and so on, and now to us. And so, in essence, this idea of a creative tradition that you can invite people to be a part of and add their voice to the tradition.
Yeah, and this is a good thing. I always love to look at a page of the Talmud where the original text shows up in the middle and it's about like this, and then you have the concentric circles of interpretation. And one of my favorite things is the interpretation that couldn't possibly be right. It is so off the wall that nobody could. So we're going to park that over in the corner here because you never know when it might get activated. I think it's a marvelous, marvelous thing that we can all learn from. Yeah, Moshe?
I'm curious about differences between those you interviewed that are married with children versus singles. Because, it seems that institutionalized religion can serve or does serve a purpose for people with families, especially if they were raised and want to somehow pass on
Yeah.
some sort of warm fuzzy from their childhood to the next generation. Do you see any difference between singles and people with children?
Yeah, it's difficult to answer that directly. I think it is true. And again, to go back to the quote here from Richard Weisberg, where he talks about engaging kids in big moral questions, and having a place where you can deal with life and death and those, all of those fundamental kinds of things, that when the next generation comes up, it's kind of like, oh, what are we going to do with that? And I've seen a number of books. There's a woman named Catherine Osment who, in fact, she's the daughter of one of the leading church historians. And she has fallen away from her faith, but she says, boy, I sure miss that sense of community, and all of that. And we did find some of that with the married folks, that they realize they have some obligation to give some sort of foundation to their kids, and they're just not sure what that looks like. And they, again, because they may have been in part of a community that was rigid and dogmatic and so on, they know that they don't want that, but they're really not sure what it is that they are looking for. And I would argue, because you've had a number, and again, this is all a work in progress, but you have organizations like something called Sunday Assembly, which is very intentionally non-theistic, non-religious, and people get together and they have good discussions and conversations. And as I understand it, that sort of, started off with, came out of the gate very rapidly and grew large in numbers and all that, and kind of has plateaued over time. And I think that tends to happen. I would say there is a sense of nostalgia for values that their upbringing embodied. But I think it also used to be said, we used to think, well, people are going to get married and all that, and if they've drifted away from the church in college or whatever, they'll come back and all that. We're seeing that less and less. I mean, to give you a direct answer, we're seeing less of that than we used to. I think because the culture as a whole has become less supportive of religion, if you will. Yeah. Yes? let me give you a very provisional answer. You know, again, this is this is all tentative. You know, don't take my word for it. But I think a lot of it happens around the dinner table. You know, I really do. I think a lot of it, people will tend to believe what they see manifested in the lives of people around them. And I think, you know, I like a good Hubble, you know, or James Webb picture as much as anybody, you know, and you can talk to people about the awesomeness of it all. But I think, well, let me give you a circuitous answer. There's an interesting little book called Awe, which just came out a few months ago, and this researcher was looking for, where do people find awe in their lives? And, you know, if we go out in nature, we look at the cosmos and all this, it's true. We do find it there, get a sense of more. But he said most of the people he interviewed said, I find my sense of awe in the stories of other people, and really brought it down closer to earth, you know. And I know that I came to my faith because of the people that I knew that I really trusted and really admired and all of that. And I think a lot of these things really come down, they do come down to that kind of mentoring. They come down to that sort of one-to-one relationship with people or within a small group. That's not a very satisfactory answer to your question, but I think we're all in process and all working on it. Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting that the word joy has entered our politics lately. And I think the French theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said the surest sign of God is the presence of joy. And I think if people see that, they may see more of, they may be inspired through that. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yes?
To your question about what things you could share with other faiths, everybody knows the adage, there are two Jews, got three opinions. I had a friend who was involved from the Catholic. Why don't you read the Bible yourself? I don't know how to do it. And if there is a way that all people in their faiths can question and ask and be unafraid of doing it, and just think this would be the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the quote that where you have two Jews, you have three opinions. Yeah, would that it were so with all of us. And I think that's pretty much exactly what a lot of our interviewees were looking for. So, yes, just one more.
Well, it occurs to me also that you were saying that they look for like many communities of like interests. And so if we could do things like finding something that would appeal to Harry Potter fans and Marvel Universe fans, to bring them in where they live, then that might be a way to get them to see that there's community out there that's multi-generational and has a tradition. And it works for them too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we need to ask ourselves is what other people are seeing in these stories that is so compelling for them. And in the Harry Potter stories, or Lord of the Rings, or any of these, you have people who are loyal to each other, who covenant, to use a fancy word that we all know, who covenant with each other for a certain mission, a certain goal, something like that. It is intriguing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that you have all these different characters, and they're all giving each other a hard time all the time. But they would literally die for each other, you know. And I think if we can find ways to get people into these covenantal kind of relationships with each other, because it's that flexible belonging kind of thing. I'm going to stick with this for a while until it doesn't work for me, then I'll go away. And again, I don't have a magic wand to wave here, but the idea of people who are stuck with each other, I think is really compelling. And those of us who are in the church, those of us who are in synagogues, those of us who are part of a faith tradition, in a sense are stuck with each other, which is a good thing, because it means we have to work through stuff. So anyway, thank you.
So I want to thank Steve. It was really very, very interesting. And you're a smart guy. Really.
If anyone desperately wants to buy a copy, I have 5 copies. It's available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the usual outlets, and all of that. So thank you for your attention.
We'll take just a 5-minute break for people who want to use the restrooms or whatever before our tefillah starts.
Someone would like to be tech and help move stuff, that'd be great.
You want any particular place here?
I've never had a water bottle as hard to open as this thickness. Literally does not open. My daughter and my daughter. She's fine. Has a C-section schedule. So I'll be here. Well, she goes in the winter. I'll be here through Rosh Hashanah for sure. So, yeah. Probably want to dive in from the middle, probably. I'll be up here. It's Shema Kolenu, Mishana, and is that it? We don't do it. Yeah, I think that's it, right? Shema Kolenu, I think, is the only. Hopefully, I'll remember. Hopefully, someone will announce it. also pull out.
Yeah, that works. I hope everyone has taken a Slichot pamphlet. During Yom Kippur, Jews pray 5 times, and toward the end of the 5 services, there's a prayer that begins with the words, El Melech Yoshev al Kisei Rachamim, Almighty King who sits upon the throne of mercy. This prayer introduces what's known as the Slichot and Vidui, sections of the service, which really make up the core of the Slichot liturgy. Vidui in Hebrew means confession. It's the human response to having erred. Slichot, which comes from the Hebrew word forgiveness, relates to God's assurance that our confession will be met with forgiveness. The core of the Slichot is the rabbinic interpretation of the biblical passage known as the Shlosh Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes, where God appeared to Moshe after the sin of the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, after Moshe prays on behalf of the people for forgiveness, telling him that his people's sin was pardoned, and God then reveals the 13 attributes of his true nature. Just parenthetically, I heard something really beautiful on an Israeli podcast this past Friday, where before that happens, God says, you can't really see me, but you can see my oref. The oref is the nape of the neck. It's the one part of the body that we can't see. And I think that says something really profound in terms of seeing an aspect of God that is very intimate and very, very secret. And then the Shlosh Esrei Midot are revealed. These 13 attributes of God are revealed, that God is an El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, rich in kindness. If only more of us could be more godlike in imitating this attribute of kindness, forgiveness, and mercy. And I think we have an opportunity during Yamim Noraim to turn inward, which is really the sense of tefillah. It's reflexive, it's turning inward and figuring out how can we embrace this divine attribute within us of kindness, of forgiveness, and of mercy. We'll begin our tefillah on page 6. Sorry, we'll begin with the handout first.
Hine Matov. So it is nice to have our community together. Easton, Bethlehem, Allentown, all here tonight, and to begin the high holiday season all together. So we'll sing Hine Matov. Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad.
Now we're on page 6.
Page 6.
Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, Od yahallelucha,
إلى لدبر من قلائم على باب الشفاء على عقبة هداية بدي بدي خاصة خانن راخ مرنا يرقى من خاصة سمعنا لكم من فيز كيف
Tehillah Adonai Yadaber Pi Vivarel Kol Basar Shem Kodesho Leolam Vaed V'anachnu Nivarech Ya Me'ata v'ad olam Hallelujah.
Page 10. Yitgadal ve'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah Mi'alamadi v'ra Kirutei v'yamelich Malachutei Vitpar, Vitromam, Vitnase, Vithadar, Vitaleve, Yitanal, Shmed Kudusha, Brilhu, Leela, Min Kol Berchata Vishirata. Tush Bechata V'nechamata Damira Mi'alma Ve'imeru Amen. Seated, continuing on page 18. Amala Vehagu Pala Usa Amara Anisha Mala Vehagu Pala Usa Amala Adonai Ase כבוד שמך כי אין חנון ורחומה. שמך למען שמך אדוני, סלחת לעווננו כי רב. Continuing on page 26.
אל ערך אפיים אתה, ובעל הרחמים נקראת, ודרך תשובה הורית. גדולת רחמך ושדיך, תזכור היום בכל יום. לזרע ידידך, תפן אלינו ברחמים, כי אתה הוא בעל הרחמים. בתקנון ובתפילה פניך נקדם, כהודעת לעיניו מקדם, מחרון אפך שוב, כמו בתורתך כתוב, ובתל כנפיך נחסה, ונתלונן כיום וירד, אדוני בענן. תעבור על פשע ותימחה אשם, כיום יתייצב עמו שם. תאזין שבתנו ותקשיב מנו מאמר, כיום ויקרא בשם אדוני, ושם נאמר, ויעבור אדוני על פניו ויקרא.
Please rise.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum Vechanun, Erech Apayim, Verav Chesed Ve'emet, Noser Chesed Malachim, Noser Achol Vafesha, וחטא ונקם. וסלחת לעווננו ומחטאתנו ומחלתנו. סלח לנו אבינו
כי
חטאנו
וחללנו
חטאנו
כי פשענו כי אתה אדוני
טוב
וסלח כי אתה
אדוני
טוב וסלח
ורב חסד לכל קוראיך.
Seated, page 30.
אל מלך יושב על כיסא רחמים, אל מלך יושב על כיסא רחמים, מתנהג בחסידות, מוחל עוונות עמו, מעביר ראשון, מרבה מחילה לחטאים וסליחה לפושעים, עושה צדקות, עם כל בשר ורוח, לא קראתם תגמול, לא קראתם תגמול. אל הורית לנו לומר 13, זכור לנו היום ברית 13, כמו שהודעת לעיניו מקדם, כמו שכתוב ירד אדוני בענן, ויתייצב עמו שם, ויקרא בשם אדוני, ויעבור אדוני על פניו ויקרא.
We rise.
Adonai, Adonai, Elohim v'chanun, Erech Apayim, v'rav chesed be'emet, Notzer chesed malachim, Nosei avon nafesha, v'chata v'nakeh. V'salach lavonenu, u'chatatenu u'chaltanu. Selach lanu, avinu, ki chatanu. Mechalanu, malkeinu, ki fashanu. Ki ata Adonai, tov v'salach. Ki ata Adonai, tov v'salach. V'rav chesed, lechol korecha.
Seated.
We live in a world that is filled with a lot of noise, right? Raise your hand if you get bombarded by 15 emails, 17 campaign contribution text messages, phone calls from, I don't know, Yehupitzville, Yemensveld, you name it, right? This is something that we see a lot. There's a lot of noise. But on page 32, and on the handout that we're going to actually, I think, use, what does it mean to listen? Do we listen to each other enough? Are we really open to hearing the other, to hearing those stories that animate our lives, that make us who we are? Throughout all of the noise, throughout all of the chatter and all the distractions, we often do more talking than listening. But our rabbis teach us that there's a reason we have one mouth, but two ears. It's because we need to listen twice as much to really hear each other, not to formulate a response or an answer, not to have the answer, but to be able to hear each other. In the beautiful poem, B'motzei Menucha, we ask God to hear us, to listen to us, to our song and to our prayer. The thing we ask God is not for the answers. We're asking God to hear us, to listen to us. And that is a powerful idea. Because we believe if God can listen, if God can hear us, if God can hear our song and our prayer, then God can know us and know that we're really good people that sometimes make mistakes and forgive them. And we too need to listen to each other. We need to be more open to the silence and the concentration that it takes to really open ourselves to someone else. The way we do that, Lishmoa El Harina Ve'el HaTefilah.
We'll start with the handout and then do the Hebrew. Shmoa el Avina ve'el hatfilah ve'el hatfilah ve'el hatfilah ze menucha ki indam nucha tefilah אוזנך ממרום יושב תפילה לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה ואל התפילה ואל
נא דורשך, בדורשם פניך, יידרש לעמוד משמי מהונך, ושבת חינונם אל תעלם אוזנך, לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה.
זוכרים ורועתי יום בואך, אם כמכירה מאבד זרעך, תפארתנה ויודו אלייך,
לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה. יוצר האדם וכל יציר נוצר, כוננת מאז טרף לחלצם ממעצר, לחננם חינם מאוצר המנוצר, לשמוע אל הבינה ואל התפילה.
מבוא ממעצנו שקר עליך, נשדה מיוצר המוכן זכות לך, לך לחון חינם באים אליך, לשמוע אל הבינה ואל התפילה.
הננה אל התלאות ועל הטהרות, צדק צועקך מחליף אל האור. שוב נא חינונם אלוהים אדוני צבאות, לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה. תפילתם ועומדם בלילות, שיהי ברצון כקורבן עלבונות. תהני זרע עושה גדולות, לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה. לשמוע אל אבינה ואל התפילה, ואל התפילה, ואל התפילה.
Rise, the mark is open. Page 36, Shema Kolenu, God, hear us.
Shema kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, chus verachem aleinu, v'kabel berachamim, ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו.
Holy Adonai Eloheinu, Kuz Rachem Aleinu, V'kabel Rachem Ratzon V'Latzei.
השיבנו עמנו כקדם. אל תשליכנו מלפניך, ברוח קודשך אל תיקח ממנו.
אל תשליכנו מלפניך, ברוח קודשך אל תיקח ממנו.
אל תשליכנו לעת זקנה, ככלות כוחנו אל תעזבנו.
אל תשליכנו לעת זקנה, ככלות כוחנו אל תעזבנו.
אל תעזבנו, אמן.
May be seated. We turn to page 40. This is the section of the Vigdui, section of the confession.
Elohino, Vedahi Avotinu, Tavo Lefanecha, Tefidatinu, Ve'al Titalam Metchinatinu, Sheina Nakdu Azefanim Ukashioref Lomar Lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu Ve'Elohi Avotinu Tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, aval anachnu chatanu. Tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu,
We rise. So the Ashamnu, as you can see, the short confessional Levidui here is alphabetical from Aleph to Tav, but it's representative of a lot more, right? So we have the words that are here. We're going to sing them together. We usually, traditionally, for each one, we pound right above our heart to show our contrition. But there are many more that we could probably add, of course, to these words. And there are some here as omissions, right? So the Aleph to Tav is just meant to be a sampling, if you will, of some of the things. Now, there's also a tradition of all the positive things that we do as well. But we have this traditional Ashamnu to remind us We are works in progress, but we have a lot of things that are broken, and our hope is God will forgive us.
And we do this as a call and response, and we do this in the plural.
Right.
This prayer is not to say that each one of us has done all of these things. Wow, that would be a lot, wouldn't it? But collectively, as a group, when any one of us misses the mark, when any one of us sins against ourselves, against each other, against humanity, against our world, against God, we all share in that culpability. We all share in that sin, which means we all can share in overcoming it and being better people in the coming year.
Ay, 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 Hashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dopi, ay, 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 Hevinu, Vehirshanu, Zadnu, Hamasnu, Tafalnu Sheker, ay, 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 Yatnura, Gizavnu, Latnu, Maradnu, Niatnu, Sararnu, Avinu, Pashanu, Sararnu, Kishinu Oref, ay, 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 Rashanu, Shichatnu, Tiabnu, Tainu, Titanu, Sarnu mitzvotecha, umimishpatecha tovim, v'lo shavalanu, ve'ata tzadik al kol ha'ba'alinu, ki emet asita, va'anachnu hirshanu.
Please read with me in the English, beginning with the English translation of Ashamnu. We abuse, we betray, we are cruel, we destroy, we embitter, we falsify, we gossip, we hate, we insult, we jeer, we kill, we lie, we mock, we neglect, we oppress, we pervert, we quarrel, we rebel, we steal, we transgress, we are unkind, we are violent, we are wicked, we are xenophobic, we yield to evil, we are zealots for bad causes. We have ignored your commandments and statutes, and it has not profited us. You are just, we have stumbled. You have acted faithfully, we have been unrighteous. We have sinned. we have transgressed. Therefore, we have not been saved. Endow us with the will to forsake evil. Save us soon. Thus, your prophet Isaiah declared, let the wicked forsake his path, and the unrighteous man his plottings. Let him return to the Lord, who will show him compassion. Let him return to our God, who will surely forgive him. We're going to turn the page to page 42. And when we look at this particular prayer, may God answer us. We're reminded of all of the times that God has answered. And whatever you believe God to be or not to be, there is a place inside of us where we look for an answer, where we look for someone to hear our question. So as you follow along or chant along or sing along, think about the questions that you desire answers for. And perhaps the way you will get that answer from God is to find the answer within you.
So each stanza ends with a piece called Hu Ya'anenu. That's the part where everyone kind of comes in. So let's just try that. Misha la rama la 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 la. Okay, good. Mishana l'Avraham Avinu behar haMoria, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, hu yaneinu. Mishana l'Yitzchak beno, shenekad al gav hamizbeach, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, hu yaneinu. Mishas al Yaakov beveit el, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, hu yaneinu. Misha leosef beveit hasurim, ay lai lai nai na nai, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Misha na lavotenu al yam suf, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Misha ana Moshe bechol rev, ay lai 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 na nai, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Mishana le'aharon b'machta, ay nai 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 nai, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Mishana le'pinchas b'kumo b'toch ha'ida, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Mishana le'Yeshua b'Gilgal, ay na na nai nai, ay na na nai nai, hu yaneinu. Mishana lishmuel b'mitzpah, ay lai 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 lai, ay la la lai lai, ay na na lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana leDavid u'Shlomo beno b'Yerushalayim, ay la la lai lai, ay la la lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana leEliyahu behar haKarmel, ay lai 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 lai, ay na na lai lai, ay na na lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana leElisha bericho, ay lai 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 lai, ay la la lai lai, ay la la lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana leona bim hadaga, ay lai 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 lai, oh ay lai lai, ay la la lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana lechizkiyahu be chol yo, ay la la lai lai, ay la la lai lai, hu yaneinu. Mishana lachananya Mishael v'Azarya b'toch kibshan ha'esh hu yaneinu. Mishana leDaniel ben begov ha'arayot, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, hu yaneinu. Mishana leMordechai veEsther b'Shushan ha'bira, ay la 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 la, ay la 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 la, hu yaneinu. Mishana lezra begola, ay lai 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 la lai, ay la la lai lai, ay la la lai lai, hu yanein. Mishana lechol tzadikim v'chasidim, v'hatemimim v'haisharim, hu yaneinu.
Continue on 44.
Okay. Adonai el babcha tochicheni, may be seated. Ve'ava habacha motcha vayasreini, choneni Adonai ki umlalani, refa'eni Adonai ki nivhalu atzamai, ve'nafshi nivhala me'od, ve'ata Adonai ad matai, shuv Adonai chaltza nafshi, oshieni leman chastecha, kin b'mavet zichrecha, bishal mi yodelach, yagati be'anchati, asche bechol laila mitati, bedimati arsi amsen. O shamikas eni, ot ka bechol torai, suru mimeni kol polei aven, ki shama Adonai kol bichi, shama Adonai techinati, Adonai tfilati kach, yevoshuvi bahalu mod, kol oivai ashuvu, Eib Shuragam. Top of page 46. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemor Sherit Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemor Sherit Yisrael. V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Yisrael, V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Yisrael HaOmrim, HaOmrim, HaOmrim Shema Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shemor Sherit Am Echad. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shemor Sherit Am Echad. V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Goy Echad, V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Goy Echad Am Yachadim. Shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shomer, Shomer, Oy Kadosh, Shemor Sherit Am Kadosh. Shomer, Goy Kadosh, Shemor Sherit Am Kadosh. V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, V'al Yovad, V'al Yovad Goy Kadosh Am Shalashim, B'shalosh Kedushot Lekadosh. May Ratzah Brachami place Bachanim in Ratzah B'Yadmornim. Only Namaseh.
Avinu malkeinu, chonenu v'aneinu. Avinu malkeinu, chonenu v'aneinu. Yevanu מחדש שמרפא. בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל בהקלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמרפא מברך לעולם עולם מעמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויבהר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמר קודשה בריחו לעילה מן כה ברכתה ושעתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל תלותן ובואתן תחו ישראל קודם אבוהן דבישמיה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום ממרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
We are going to conclude the service with Yigdal, which is on your supplements, and then we will hear the shofar sounding.
May be seated. יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח נמצא ואין עת אל מציאותו אחד ואין יחיד כי כבודו נעלם וגם אין סוף לאחדותו אין לו דמות הגוף ואין לו גוף לא נערוך אליו קדושתו קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו הינו אדון עולם לכל נוצר יורא גדולתו ומלכותו שפע נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד נביא ומביט את אמונתו תורת אמת נתן לעמו אל נביאו נאמן ביתו לא יחליף האל ולא ימיר דתו לעולמים לזולתו צופה ויודע סתרנו מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו גומר לאיש חסד כמפעלו נותן לרשע רע כרישתו תשלח לקץ ימין, משיחנו לבדוק מחכה קץ ישועתו, מתים יחייל ברוך חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו, מתים יחייל ברוך חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו. Please rise. Shana Tova Umitsuka. Happy, healthy, sweet New Year.
לשנה טובה
לשנה.
תיקתנו,
Ashkar.
תיקתנו.
Another year to look forward to. Hopefully, better, much better.
You know, there's some amazing, amazing poems in here about the,
You know, my edition is different. I couldn't follow it.